Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is Sarah Haas with the Boss Body Podcast. I'm so happy that you're here, and I can't wait for you to hear what my guest has to say. I have with me today Nanci Reed. Nanci is not only an author, she is a sacred embodiment coach and an intuition amplifier. I'm going to let her tell you all about that. But what I'm really excited to talk about is her book. She has written a book called Happily Ever Now,
Now.
not after everything else is perfect. A gentle guide for overcoming the paralysis of perfectionism by embracing our innate guidance. And perfectionism is something I definitely struggle with. I am a self-proclaimed perfectionist. I'm in recovery. It's a work in progress, but I know that so many of my listeners deal with the same issue all the time. So I love that you have written us a book to really help us through that. So, Nanci, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a delight to be here with you.
So I would love for you just to tell us, let us get to know you a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you came to write this book. And I know that you sort of had a change in careers because you started out as a Pilates instructor, but I'd love for you to tell us about you and how that kind of led you on to other things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess if I was to go way, way, way back, what I would say is that when I was a little girl, I would be able to feel the energy of a room before I even went into it. And I didn't really know what to do with that. And I was definitely an empath, but that wasn't really a term that was used much when I was little. And there wasn't really many people that I could really talk to about my experiences. And so I sort of was in this place of being like, well, I just want to be like everybody else. And none of my friends are talking about stuff like this. So this is just weird. And I better, bury this deep and not really allow any of this to come out into the open. And so I really suppressed those awarenesses and really those gifts that I was born with for a very long time, trying to just blend in. I remember when I was a little girl in like maybe middle school or something, we had an essay we could write about the superpower that we would want more than anything else in the world. And it seemed like most of the class, for whatever reason, picked flying. I didn't pick flying. I picked the power of invisibility because I thought that if I was invisible, that then I could just go through my life. I could be me. I could have all the quirks and all the quote unquote weirdness that came with having this ability to feel people's emotions, to specifically feel their pain, to feel their any sort of challenges that they might be having. Even if their face was smiling, I could get the sense that there was something more there. And complete strangers would come up to me, even as a young child, and tell me their whole life story. And it was very overwhelming. And I didn't know what to do with it. And I wasn't really able at that point to ground myself or to know if an emotion that I was feeling was my own or if it was from somebody else. And so this idea of invisibility was like amazing. I was like, okay, that way I can keep my perfectionism. I can be as however I'm going to be, and nobody's going to be able to judge me for it. Nobody's going to be able to tell me that being me, I'm doing it wrong. And there was something really appealing to that idea. So I did my best to stay in the background. I did my best to be the good student, to check off all the boxes, do all the things the world says to be perfect. Because I thought that if I could be perfect on the outside, then maybe nobody would ever uncover what was going on inside with me. And I could keep that anonymity and really keep that part of myself hidden from anyone else's outside judgment.
And I think so many of us struggle with that, especially in the younger years and in the teen years. We don't like to share what's going on internally because we don't hear other people sharing it. And we're like, oh, I must be weird. I'm not going to bring this up. And I know what it's like to be an empath because I am as well. And it just basically, it comes from that word empathetic, where when someone else is sad, you can feel their sadness, and it is such a gift. And I think it's one of my biggest gifts as a mother, as a coach, you know, in relationships, whatever. And it's kind of normal and natural that when we're younger, we want to tamp our gifts down because we think the things that make us different are the unattractive parts of us.
Mm.
And what you said about, if I can just make myself perfect on the outside, maybe everybody won't know that I'm so imperfect on the inside. And I think that's chronic. That's very chronic in our society, especially for women right now.
Absolutely. And so whether or not somebody listening to this is identifying as an empath or not, we each have a part of ourselves inside that we feel like that if everyone else saw it, they wouldn't like us, or they wouldn't love us, or they wouldn't accept us. And so we keep that hidden, we keep it buried, and then we start to infuse it with all the shame and blame and comparison and all the unkindness that we can. And that part actually is pretty easy. That's the really sad part, is that it's pretty easy for us to be unkind to ourselves. It's pretty easy for us to judge ourselves, especially if we're holding ourselves up to this unrealistic and flat out impossible version of perfectionism that is never going to arrive. It's like that train that's never going to show up at your destination, right? You're always going to be waiting there and waiting and waiting and waiting. And so as I got older and more candles graced my birthday cakes and everything, I kept on trying more and more and more with great effort to keep that part of me hidden. And yet little glimpses would come through where I'd be at like a bookshop or something, and I'd be sitting in the coffee store, maybe that was, attached to it or something like that. And people would come up and, like I was saying, they would just tell me their life story. And it got to the point that when I moved to LA, I was so overwhelmed by like this happening randomly that I remember I specifically bought big headphones like what you're wearing today. And and I put them over my ears because I thought, well, then people will think I'm busy. Then they won't even bother tapping me on the shoulder and whatever, because I didn't know what to do with them telling me their life story. I felt like that there was some sort of, assignment almost that I was being a part of by even agreeing to have this happen in this exchange. And I never really saw the people afterwards. I mean, I can only think of like one or two people that I ever stayed in contact with that this happened. So it was such a random occurrence. And and yet they still came, even though I had the headphones on. And so like it occurred to me that, oh, well, maybe there's something that is really beyond me. Like it's beyond the physical, that there's something they're picking up on. And maybe this isn't something I need to be ashamed of anymore. Maybe this isn't something I need to hide from. Maybe actually there's something here that I could be listening to. And so all of that is going on. And, before that, that precipitated the move to LA too. I had gone through many different things in my life where I got married, I got divorced. I felt like a complete failure from that because I was told I could never have children because I was born with only one kidney, two uteruses, and no partridge in a pear tree. But I had this condition, very rare. It's called uterus didelphys. And so with that, it's almost impossible to carry a baby to full term. And that if you do, it's almost definitely going to be preterm. And there's always a chance, because I had the one kidney, that if I had a child, it would be born with no kidneys, which was basically be stillborn. So I pretty much made peace with the idea that I wasn't going to be a mother in this lifetime in that specific form. Yes, there's adoption and there's other ways, but my husband and I, we just didn't see that as our option. And so I made peace with that. And then I came to the idea that, well, if I'm not going to be a mother, then who am I? What am I here for? What is my purpose? And so when I was in a really bad car accident and nearly died from not listening to my inner voice telling me not to get in the car because I was the passenger and went over a cliff, what I saw was all of these moments in my life up until that point where there had been some sort of either intentional or unintentional unkindness between me and another person. And that's all I saw. And I remember thinking as we were going over the edge of this cliff, like, why am I being shown this? What is the purpose of this? Like, there must be something really significant here. I'm not just being shown a replay of my entire life, I'm being shown these instances where there was a resentment or there was some sort of relationship, unkindness that either it was intentional or unintentional. So after I was able to climb away from the accident with the help of a literal guardian angel who arrived to help me come off the side of the cliff to get back. And I was in so much physical pain from having a separated right AC joint in my shoulder. Then what I came to know was that all of the PTSD, all of the nightmares and everything that came from having the accident and surviving it, that there was a part of me that believed that I hadn't survived it, that I'd actually was still at the bottom of that cliff. And it would haunt me. And so I'd have these dreams for months afterwards where the driver's face would actually change to different people. And then I remember one night it was my own face. And then I recognized that there was that little voice inside of me that said, don't get in that car. But as I had done for so many years, I had muted her basically and I told myself, oh no, everything will be fine. I want to be cool. I want this guy to like me that I was on a date with, and all this stuff. And then right before we went over the edge, though, of the cliff, I heard the voice again. And this time it said, push up. And this time I listened because I knew that there was something that it was trying to protect me from that I really did want to hear because we were going over the edge. And so I wedged my arm up into the roof of the car. And that's what kept me from actually having a much more serious injury. But it did hurt my shoulder in the process. But that whole experience of listening and hearing and actually responding to it and having it be something that was a good thing was really powerful because then that same voice, when I was having all these nightmares, began to just very gently sort of nudge me into this idea of writing. And so I picked up a journal that I'd been given, and I still remember the cover. It said, The Dream Within. And so I opened it up and I began to write. And what I noticed was that as I was writing, it was almost like I was remembering rather than something new. And as I was writing, the pain lessened in my shoulder. The pain lessened emotionally. And so this writing is really what began to be my healing. And then from that, physically, I addressed the injuries with Pilates, which I became so impressed with. I decided to defer my PhD program that I was going to do in neuropsychology and just get the master's and instead learn how to be a certified Pilates instructor, focusing on using Pilates for rehabilitation and injuries.
That is an incredible story. I have chills. I mean, just having that near death experience and having that be what shows you what's really inside, and that you need to hear that and honor it. Just in that moment, that is exactly what you saw. And it took, getting hit over the head with a baseball bat. I always say you get little whispers, you get little feelings, you get little intuitions. And if you keep ignoring it, they'll get stronger and louder and louder. And it sounds like that's sort of what happened with you. And you were so focused on, let's be perfect. Let's do check off the boxes. Let's do this, and this. And in all that, you were ignoring who you really are.
Absolutely. And then the writing, what I noticed was that the more that I was writing, the less the pain that I felt. And the more that I actually felt more peaceful, just in general, about everything that was going on. So even on the outside, my life looked like a total mess because I had this injury that, you really couldn't see it from the outside, but I felt it all the time. The pain was there. And then I had these awful nightmares. from the experience of the accident. And I literally felt numb afterwards. Like I used to hold my hand over candles to try to feel something because I was so detached from being here because I felt like I didn't make it here. So what I didn't mention was that when we went over the cliff, the window was down in the car. And so all this dirt came in to the window on top of me. So I was literally buried in dirt. And I think that added to that visceral sort of like, I must be dead. And so there was just that real detachment to me where I was sort of going through the motions in life. But with writing, I was totally present. And with writing, I was in the moment. And that was actually one of the first things I wrote was something called The Instant Is All There Is. And it was all about being here in the moment, being here, that there was no time beyond now. And so all of this kind of planted these seeds of curiosity and wonder. And then as I was addressing the physical healing of the accident with Pilates and then deciding to teach it, I decided to share my writing with my mother, actually, who has been a student and teacher of A Course in Miracles for her whole life. And I had never really even opened the book in my childhood because I was like, Mom, what do I say you do? Yeah, people come to your house. There's like this blue book and you talk about things. You seem to feel better, but what really is this thing? How can I explain this to my friends? And she was like, it's okay. It's not about needing to get anyone else to think differently. You never have to read this book at all. She said, but it helps me. And so I was like, okay, well, sounds good to me. So, and I couldn't deny that she was becoming a much more grounded and I'd say just present person herself through her study of this and her teaching of it. And so what was interesting was after I wrote a few, probably months of my journaling and I showed it to her and she was like, you wrote this? And I said, yeah. And she's like, wow, this is very different than any of the writing you've ever done before. And I said, yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. It's like, it doesn't feel like something new for me. It feels like I'm like remembering something or like that I'm hearing something like this voice that's always been there with me. And she was like, well, these are really lovely. She said, do you mind if I share them with some people that I know? And I was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And so she did. And one of those people was someone who was very connected to one of her mentors, Ken Wapnick, who became one of my mentors. And he was the original teacher of A Course in Miracles. And so they showed him my writings, and I guess he thought that they were also lovely. And so he decided to just call me out of the blue on the phone. And this is before cell phones. And so I remember I was in my mom's kitchen and I was doing something with the dog or something like that. And the phone rang and she answered it. And she's like, hey, it's for you. And I was like, oh, okay, thinking it's like grandma or something. And like I hear on this other voice on the other end, and he's like, oh, is this the famous Nanci? And I was like, yes, who is this? And he's like, oh, I'm Ken Wapnick. I teach A Course in Miracles and I'm a friend of your mom's. And I read your journal and I got to tell you, it's just lovely. It's just beautiful. And I was like, oh, thank you. And he said, so here's the thing. I want you not to read the book at all. And I want you not to read anything else, like, spiritual texts or anything like that right now. He said, just keep listening. Don't let it be any sort of forcing, any sort of urgency to it. But whenever you feel like writing, just go ahead and keep writing. And so I was like, well, that sounds doable. Okay, I could do that. And he said, and here's my number, and you can call me anytime with any questions. And he said, you can fax me pages if you want, and I'll be happy to look at them as they come through. But again, no hurry, no forcing or anything. And he said, and maybe, at some point I'll call you and say, well, this is a day, if you're curious, you can open that blue book. And I was like, okay, just for whatever reason, I trusted him implicitly from the beginning. And there was something so soothing and grounding. And again, it felt like I already knew him. And so about 6 months went by. And then I remember he called me up again, and I'd been speaking to him in between then. And he was always super responsive. And he said, okay, today's the day. He's like, if you're curious and you want to see it, go ahead and grab the blue book from your mom and just open up to a page. He's like, it doesn't matter what page you opened up to, just open it up. So I opened it up to the section called The Forgotten Song. And it's all about basically remembering this truth that connects all of us and that is the oneness of all of us. And I was reading it and I was like, wow, this is kind of similar to what I've been writing. And he said, well, yes, because truth is truth. And he said, so you're hearing it in a way that is bringing you comfort. And he said, and you came to it from pain. And so, now you get to see that actually you can integrate it into all of your life. And that if you find it helpful for you now, it can be helpful for you always. And I'd love to have you come to meet me and come to one of my classes and everything. And so I arranged to do that. And that began that relationship of him being my mentor and being able to really look at this part of myself with his help. And his big foundational message was always kindness. And that resonated with me from day one. And so my message that I talk about, like in my book, is all about kindness and curiosity. And it's really an extension of so many of the ideas and conversations that I've had with Ken.
So I want to dive in and talk about your book a little more. So Happily Ever Now, which I love I love that title because and then in parentheses it says not after everything is perfect. So how did you come to that title? Because I know that myself and a lot of the women I talk to and my clients feel like, okay, I'll be happy when, I get this job or when I lose this weight or when I have this relationship or when I have children, whatever it is. And so I love that you're changing that around and also that you wove in the perfectionism aspect because it seems like that's sort of what holds us back is we think we have to have all our ducks in a row, everything lined up perfectly to be happy, and then we'll start being happy.
Yeah, and it's that the idea came from having a conversation actually with a client, a coaching client, where I was speaking to her and I was telling her she was talking about waiting for X, Y, and Z to happen before she was able to say yes to this big decision that she wanted to make in her life. And I just was talking to her and I said, well, you're just waiting for the after, and the after's never going to come. I said, but now this is your happily ever now. And she was like, wait, what? What did you just say? She said, say that again. And I said, this is your happily ever now, not after. And she's like, that. She's like, that was what I needed to hear. And then I was like, oh, maybe that's the title of my book. And then so because I'd already started writing the book, but I didn't have a title yet. And I knew that it was about kindness and curiosity. I knew it was about overcoming perfectionism and everything else, but I didn't have a way to really frame it all until I had that conversation. And then I was like, well, this is it. Because especially as a woman, we wait for the after. We wait for after somebody asks us out on a date to get to wear that awesome dress that we've been saving in our closet that's never getting worn. We wait for after the world says that we have accumulated enough letters after our name to feel like we have the expertise to say what's true for us, right? We're always waiting. We're always giving away our power. We're always giving away our choices. And if we're ascribing to perfectionism, right? And the thing with perfectionism that isn't really talked very much about, and I do mention it in my book, and I'm actually thinking that, actually knowing that this is going to be part of my second book, is going to be looking at this idea with kindness and curiosity and gently that as a perfectionist, we tend to believe that if I give away my power of my decisions, if I give away my choices to something outside of me or someone outside of me, then that means I'm off the hook for the decision and for the outcome. And that way we get to preserve our perfectionism. We get to keep our track record, right? Of always checking off those boxes and doing everything right and staying within that spectrum that the world has said is okay for us to operate within. Because then if it doesn't go the way that quote unquote the world says, we go, well, it's not our fault. This person came in and they were the expert, or this person said that they were going to, X, Y, or Z or something else. And I was just the face of innocence, as the Course in Miracles says, right? Like I'm over here, I'm the victim of this. But what we don't get is that not making a decision is a decision. And it's a decision to choose our perfectionism over being present. Because when we are not making a decision, we're not being able to be in the present. We're focusing on either being afraid from something from our past that we're worried about is going to somehow define our future. And so we're missing those opportunities for the now. And instead, when we say that now is always the perfectly imperfect time to begin living your own happily ever now, Well, that changes everything. And when you shift from going for perfectionism to going to perfectly imperfect, every moment is perfectly imperfect. Everything you do is perfectly imperfect. Every aspect of your story to this exact instant is perfectly imperfect. And it opens up all possibilities. So now nothing is impossible. And I like to ask, well, what is possible when you truly believe that nothing is impossible? And the answer, everything. And that was the game changer for me. That's the transformation that made everything shift into a different type of perception, in that I knew who I am at my core. And I know that. And I can say, this is me. This is my perfectly imperfect self. Are there parts of me that I'd want to do over? Okay, yeah, but not really, because it got me to where I am here today. And that's all the time there is. There's not one moment guaranteed beyond this instant. And so, how can I show up as me everywhere with everyone, my perfectly imperfect self? Knowing that then that's the consistency that I provide and that I weave into my life and all of my relationships, all of my choices, all of my decisions, is the consistency of knowing the truth of me as a perfectly imperfect self. And then the world can just keep whirling on. All the changes in the world can happen, all the chaos, all the everything. And I get to navigate it from that sense of knowing the perfectly imperfect me.
I love that because basically you're taking back your own power. You're taking
Mhm.
back your power to experience the world as yourself and to have enjoyment in every moment instead of, I think this is something that a lot of people haven't really even considered or identified within themselves. And the paralysis by perfectionism is basically this never ending cycle because you're like, once I'm perfect, I'll be happy. But you can never get to perfect. So you're not ever getting to happy. And it's just keeping you sort of stuck in that rut and in that thinking that, okay, I'll be happy when this happens. I'll, reaching for that later. And once we can just realize that we're all who we are, and that is perfect. Imperfect is perfect. We're not meant to be perfect. Then you break away and you have the freedom to go ahead and start moving forward. And even in small ways, like you said, wear that outfit, take that vacation, do whatever, don't be waiting for everything until it looks a certain way. And so I love that your book is really pointing out something that I think a lot of us just aren't even aware of. It's, not even in our consciousness. And this was obviously divinely, inspired because when you had that near death experience, this is what started coming out. And so what you've written is going to help so many people. Um, so I just want to thank you for putting that out in the world, first of all. And I know that a lot of people listening are going to want to start figuring this out for themselves. They're going to want to they're thinking, I know, if I were hearing this 10 years ago, I've done a lot of this work and I'm still doing a lot of this work. But if I'd heard this 10 years ago, I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, she's talking about me. She's talking to me. This is me." But what do I do? What do I do? Where do I go from here? How do I start, you know,
Well,
not
the
trying to
way,
be perfect?
yeah, the way you start is you forgive yourself first for believing that perfectionism was something that was possible and was something that was actually something you wanted. And so you look at that with kindness and curiosity. You look at it with gentleness. You don't go to war with that part of yourself. You don't try to shame yourself, blame yourself, compare yourself, but you must look, because only when we fully look can we disarm. And when we disarm the effect and the power something has, then we actually can dispel it. But if we keep it as something that we deny, we actually make it larger. We feed it. We give it our power by believing it has power over us, right? And that it has so much power over us that we can't even look at it. Because if we did, we'd feel so much shame or so much darkness or so much anything. And the thing is that it's by looking to see it all that we can heal it all. And I really have experienced that myself. And perfectionism is not something that I could say, quote unquote, I'm cured of. And it's not even something you want to be cured of, because there is no perfection in how you cure perfectionism. It's a non-linear experience. It's a non-temporal, it's more of an abstract experience and feeling. And I still get triggered every single day. There's still those old things that show up where people seem to have more expertise, or dominance, domineering men. That was a big classroom for me. And, all of these other things. And they still show up. So they don't just go away. The only thing is I don't judge myself when they show up. Is that, well, I must not be doing a good job at this imperfectionism thing because look at my life. Instead, I go, oh, well, that's just there to remind me there's that part of me that's still unhealed. Hmm. I wonder what that's for. I wonder how I can bring more softness to how I'm seeing this. I wonder how I can be more open to what this is trying to show me. Now, it doesn't mean that I condone bad behavior or deny anything that's happening to me at all. I still set boundaries, limitations, all of that. But again, I come from that solid place of knowing who I am. And if I am my perfectly imperfect self, then there's going to be times that I go down those rabbit holes of perfectionism again. And that's okay. It's about, can I recognize when I'm going down those rabbit holes and go, oh, there is another way here. There is another way to be with myself. There is another way to see this and not feel like that I need to atone for that the rest of my life, or that I've committed some sort of terrible sin, and instead see it with a lighter lens. That if we can't laugh at something about ourselves, how can we change it? So it's not to deride ourselves or make fun of ourselves or humiliate at all. It's just to see the lightness in it and go, well, if I can take myself lighter, then I can let go of more darkness and I can go through it, and I can be the light that's actually traveling through it. And so I don't have to go to war with the darkness. I don't have to think that I need to destroy it or somehow annihilate it. Instead, I can let it be as it is, but not have to judge it and not have to believe it.
I love that. Basically, the first step is always awareness, which you are
Mhm.
bringing to so many people right now with everything that you're saying. And then the second step is just accepting it instead of judging yourself, instead of shaming yourself. And then instead of doing that, become curious and say,
Mhm.
oh, this is trying to tell me something. This is popping up because there's something that needs work, that needs healing. And it's actually a good thing that this is popping up instead of a bad thing. All right,
Yeah,
Nanci.
and
Wow.
to just assume that perfectionism in its own way, it thought it was protecting you.
Yeah.
And so if you can be grateful to that part of it, even though you're not building a shrine to it anymore, you can at least acknowledge that it thought it was helping you, and now you can have a different choice.
Yeah. And then instead of bumping up against it, you're accepting it and going with
Mhm.
the flow. Nanci, thank you so much. This has been just such a wonderful conversation. And if you all listening want to learn more about Nanci, you can go online and find her at nancireed.com. And Nanci is Nanci, and it's Reed. And if you want to find out more about her book, you can go to happilyeverNowBook.com. Nanci, I want to thank you so much for being here. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been a delight, and I'm so grateful for this connection.
Excellent. And thank you all for being here and for listening in. That is all I have for you today. And so until next time, I will see you then.